Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started as people trickle in. So I just wanted to start with a big thank you to Christine Tang of the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute, who planned this entire event. All the credit goes to her. She's feeling a little under the weather, so we're just going to step in today and help run the logistics. My name is Ashley Atkins. I'm the Executive Director of the West Big Data Innovation Hub and a co-PI on the Transboundary Groundwater Resilience Project, or TGR for short. I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to this TGR panel series today. In the first hour, we're going to start with a Demystifying Data to Enable Community Action for Transboundary Groundwater Resilience panel, and then the Career Development panel will take place in the second hour. This event is hosted by the TGR Network of Networks. TGR is a project funded by the National Science Foundation's ExcelNet program, and it aims to connect and leverage the strengths of water data, social, and system science to catalyze transformative change for transboundary groundwater systems. We'll add some more links now to the chat so that you can learn more about TGR and some of our upcoming activities and opportunities. I'm pleased to introduce the presenters for the Demystifying Data to Enable Community Action panel. We'll also go ahead right now and put in a link where you can access their abstracts and extended bios. Each panelist is going to present for approximately 10 minutes, and then the panelists will have time to ask each other questions, and then we'll open up to the Q&A for the audience. Catherine Kramer of the San Diego Supercomputer Center in the West Hub is going to moderate the Q&A. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Christine Kirkpatrick, who is the Division Director of Research Data Services at the San Diego Supercomputer Center at UC San Diego. She's also a TGR co-PI, and Christine is going to present on FAIR data.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and thanks again to Christine Tang for putting together this great panel of people. I'm so thankful to be part of it. Okay, so I stuck with the topic, which was the key being demystifying data. I know we talk about a lot of things around data, and I'm always wondering if we're on the same page. I imagine that some people get thrown in the deep end with research and feel like they never got the just the foundational thing. So that's where I'm starting out today. This really goes back to, where we are in the paradigms of science. And Tony Hay was the one who coined this term, the fourth paradigm of science. But basically, for the first, 1,000 years or more, people did experiments, right? Apple falling from a tree kind of thing. Then we moved into theories, right? Like Newton's laws. Then the last 30 or 40 years was about using computation to simulate things. And where we are right now, and in the last 10 or so years, has been the era of data intensive science, where we're basically completely overwhelmed with data. But this is the way that we do science now. And on the bottom, you can see, I think this is, we all talk about, 80% of the time with data is spent finding and cleaning. Here's some data about that. This is not new to the era of data science. Even in the 80s, it was documented that computer scientists doing data mining were spending about 80% of the time doing things that felt pretty secretarial. I think that most of the public, even, well, my mom knows it's not like this now because I'm in computer science and I talk to her about how hard it is. But I think before that, my mom would think from the news and all the stories she reads that, doing artificial intelligence is like pressing the easy button. You press it and some magic happens. But we know behind the scenes that, basic analysis, basic data-driven science, all the way up to machine learning is super complicated. You need a lot of specialized training, sometimes specialized hardware. So just for fun, I know a lot of people are talking about ChatGPT and, artificial intelligence writing things. So I took a stab to see what it thought I should present to all of you. And I was pretty amused. I mean, it's somewhat coherent. I really like the last part where I should encourage you to use data to enhance your research. Well, I'm guessing you don't need that encouragement. Here's what I'm actually going to talk about and what I think is relevant. Just starting at the basics. What is data and metadata? Where does semantics enter in? And then that gives us a good context for FAIR, and then a couple other related topics. I'm going to try and do it in my time allotted. Okay, so I think we all know what data is, but just to make sure we're on the same page, it's a discrete chunk of information. And you can have different kinds of chunks of information. This was not carefully selected. This was a tweet from yesterday. And so here's the actual tweet, which really looks like spam. This lady with her chihuahuas. But here's what the data looks like on the back end. And you can see there's things that are unique identifiers for the author, for the message, some information about location, some data that the person themselves put in. That's metadata. That's data about the data, right? And in hydrology, that's location, time and date, the source of it. That's the key metadata, but there's so much else that you can do with that. One of the reasons that data is so hard to find and organize is we haven't annotated and organized it well. So this is where semantics come in. And apologies if there are any librarians or people who work in information science, but this is the just what you need to know version. So here's kind of a continuum, starting with list, going all the way to ontology, which is the richer type of semantics. So moving up, this continuum. So starting with the list, I think you know what a list is, but maybe you're not totally sure what a controlled vocabulary is. If you've ever filled out a web form and it asks you what state you're in, it doesn't let you write Cali, doesn't let you write Calif, period. You're selecting it from a dropdown. Controlled vocabulary. A glossary. I know what a glossary is because when I was studying to be part of the spelling bee in elementary school, I would take my old textbooks and read in the back. That's basically what a glossary is. Here's one from UNESCO, a hydrology glossary, and they've actually translated it into several languages, but it's basically just words and definitions in plain language. Okay, moving up the continuum, you've got the thesaurus. And so here's an example from the National Library of Medicine. If you're as old as I am, you use the thesaurus, that was a book. Maybe if you're a little younger in Word, to right mouse click and you can get to this thesaurus. This is kind of like that, but a little richer. So I had typed in water and it brought me groundwater. And you can see here under the concepts tab, it's showing me all the different ways you can refer to it, including here's a narrower definition, right? Here's something that's related. And so this, when you are generating data or metadata, gives you a way to tap in and make sure that you're using descriptors that other people are using so that they can find and that machines can understand how this data is organized and relates to other data. Okay, so here's where things get a little more confusing. Taxonomy, it's a big word people use, not necessarily in the context of semantics. Like computer science uses taxonomy and ontology, and it's slightly different. Okay, well, taxonomy slides out of order. But basically the idea there is that it shows a hierarchy of definitions. And I apologize that it's not right there. Okay, skipping over that to ontology. BioPortal is, I would say, the gold standard for publishing your ontologies. The life sciences is far ahead of the earth sciences. And so I didn't have a great example to show you, but I did just have sinus surgery. And so I thought I'd jump and show you where that fits in to the International Classification of Diseases. So aside from having something that's kind of a taxonomy that shows you how these things relate and drill down, you can also see amongst 30 plus, here we go, 32 other ontologies that exist, this specific disease has been mapped amongst all those ontologies. So if you're using this term and you identify that it's from the International Classification of Diseases version 10, then a computer can say, oh, this means the same as all of these 30 other things wherever they're mentioned. Now, these are complicated concepts that are mostly governed, well, in the past by research librarians, information scientists. So a group of researchers got together in 2014 at a workshop, and then in 2016 published the FAIR principles, which stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And be careful, some people say reproducible, but it's reusable is the last one. There's 15 principles. The key takeaways are that it tells you to make data and research objects fair, but machine actionable. So when I see 3:30, I can guess that's probably PM in most contexts, but a machine can't, and it doesn't know what time zone that was in. It needs to know the date, and it needs, AM or PM is not obvious. And so it's adopting these things that aren't just deducible by humans, but understandable by machines. And the second concept is that FAIR is aspirational. You're not going to get there and say done and slap a badge on it. Now, people will tell you there are tools to do that, but not really. It's something that you're going to keep improving upon. New tools come out, new concepts, and you add those in. And you do the best you can with the resources you have. Some other important concepts that come up when you talk about data or FAIR data, but aren't necessarily part of FAIR. FAIR's silent on data quality. So you could have FAIR data that was, the old adage, like my mom would say, garbage in, garbage out. So it is important to also think about data quality, reproducibility. So looking at this graphic here at the bottom, reproducibility doesn't just mean that when I run computation and the answer's 5, that when you run it, the answer's 5. It means that you get an answer that leads you to the same interpretation of the results, which might not be exactly the same number, but it's being able to interpret the results the same way. And then open science. So FAIR doesn't necessarily mean open, but in the US, we have 2 important memos that came out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. The Holdren memo, which was issued about 10 years ago, that pushed agencies to make their data open. And then the Nelson memo, which had just came out in the last 6 months, which notifies agencies and the research that they fund to take away that 1-year embargo on keeping data private and immediately releasing data, among some other recommendations, but that's the key one, to make research more accessible more quickly. So penultimate slide, well, I guess almost the last slide, but here's a quick summary, and we'll have a link to the slides if you want to look at this afterwards. But if you're wondering what are some simple things that I can do to make my data fair, or my research objects, because software, workflows, machine learning models are all things that you can make fair. It's assigning unique identifiers, depositing them, noting them with community repositories where possible, and ensuring that there's good metadata. I've also included this plus symbol that means some of these things not only help with FAIR, but also help with reproducibility. Things like providing a Jupyter notebook that shows somebody, how can I actually rerun what you've done or use your data? Here's a couple easy ideas on adding FAIR into your life. There's some great interest groups at the Research Data Alliance, at CoData, at GoFair. I host GoFair US. Just yesterday, we had a webinar on how to create an ORCID ID and why you would do that. That gives you a unique identifier for you. Some publications ask for this. Another thing is if you are creating data with what you're doing, look and see if somebody's created a controlled vocabulary or a taxonomy, something that you can use. You don't have to invent these things from the start. And I'll put in the chat how to join the GoFair US list, which is a way, kind of a clearinghouse and a way to hear about all of these different ideas. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll be happy to take any questions when Catherine says it's time.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, Christine. So if you have questions for Christine or any of the other presenters, you can feel free to start adding them into the chat, and then we'll refer to them during the Q&A session. following the presentations. So next up, we have Clara Cogswell, who is a community support hydrologist at CWASI, the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Science, and she's going to present on HydroShare and data resources.
I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. My name is Clara Cogswell. I'm the community support hydrologist at CWASI, and today I'm going to give you kind of a lightning overview of HydroShare, our open source data repository. A quick word on CWASI. We're a nonprofit funded in part by the National Science Foundation. We offer both education and outreach services and data services, but obviously today I'll be talking more about our data services. And CWASI administers and maintains HydroShare. And we do this in pursuit of allowing people to make their water data fair. So as Christine mentioned, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we try to do this through HydroShare's robust and intuitive interface. So some things that HydroShare offers that we think are important in any repository in which you store your data are a landing page for your data, a persistent URL, and if you choose to publish, a persistent digital object identifier for your data. Access control at various levels, allowing you to collaborate on your data before releasing it, and searchability and discoverability, as well as domain specificity, so you know that your collaborators and your peers are using this repository to store their data, and the data in the repository will be relevant to your research as well. It also automatically generates a citation for your data set, regardless of what sharing status it's at. So how is data organized in HydroShare? In HydroShare, data is stored within a unit called a resource. That's the primary unit of digital content and discovery. It's essentially a landing page for your data that walks users through the metadata template in a coherent manner. And the metadata elements that we offer are quite robust: title, abstract, keywords, and I'll show you all of them in a few minutes when we actually jump over to HydroShare. And it offers data storage in a familiar file folder tree format in the content section of your resource. So when you put data in HydroShare, you create a resource and you store your data in it. So it can be hard to kind of know what I'm talking about without seeing it. So this is a quick view of a resource. You can see the metadata template as well as the content section. There's a Jupyter notebook and a CSV, as well as citation at the bottom. And back at the top, you can see a title, abstract, the sharing status, how many times it's been viewed and downloaded, who the owner is, and how much storage this resource consumes. Data access in HydroShare is something people really appreciate. Being able to kind of know who's accessing your data. So the default sharing status of a resource is private, and that means that only owners and added viewers can view it. And we assume at this stage you're adding your collaborators who are working with you on the data to make sure that the data is of quality. Discoverable means only the metadata is viewable and it can be found on the Discover page. But in the discoverable state, the content is not downloadable, only the metadata is viewable. And users will have to reach out to the owner to get access to the data files. Public means that all of the metadata and content is both viewable and downloadable. So anyone who finds your resource can download all of the contents and view all of the metadata. And it means that your resource has a persistent public URL that can always be used to access that landing page. Published means that it is discoverable both on the Discover page and Google Dataset Search, has a DOI, and anyone can find and download the data, and the content is immutable. So the big difference between public and published resources is that a public resource is more like a living document. You can continue to make changes to the content in a public resource. But once it has a DOI, it has to be more like a book on a shelf. A published resource, the content is immutable because the citation needs to remain the same. So a published resource, title, authorship, and content cannot be altered. And publishing a resource is not reversible, and it must be discoverable in this state. You can add other users to your resource as owners, editors, or viewers. Owners can take any action on a resource. They can delete the resource, change the quota holder, and remove and add other owners. And the quota holder is the person for whom the resource consumes your automatically allocated 20 gigabytes of storage. So every HydroShare user is allocated 20 gigabytes upon account creation. Editors can make any change to the resource except changing the sharing status, adding or removing owners from the resource, and changing the quota holder. And viewers cannot make changes to a resource, but can find and view and download the contents, even if the resource sharing status is set to private. So making a resource is highly intuitive, but it's much easier for me to just show you. So at this point, I'm going to switch over to a live demo in HydroShare, but you can reference these slides in the future if you need to. Awesome. All right, so this is clearly a resource that I've created specifically for the purposes of showing people how to make and edit a resource in HydroShare. If I wanted to create a brand new one, I would go to Create, Resource, and it says a resource, which can include multiple files without file format limitations. And if I click that, it will generate a new resource landing page for me. So you can see here the title, Data Privacy on HydroShare Example Resource. The title should be human readable and should describe the contents of the resource. The abstract, this resource was created to demonstrate different access controls available to users on HydroShare. This is good because the abstract is kind of a longer version of the title in the sense that it should describe the contents of the resource, the purpose of the resource, and how you want users to interact with the contents of the resource, as well as anything else they need to know about using that data. So I'm going to go into edit mode on this resource so we can edit this metadata. So I could edit the title. I just added a space, save my changes. I could edit the abstract and add more details. I could add another subject keyword. You can see I use the CZNet keyword a lot, but that would be a repeat of a previous keyword. Subject keywords are one of the ways that your resource is discovered, and the resource landing page is what is scraped by Discover and Google Dataset Search when the resource is being found by search engines. Geographic coverage. So you can see here, I have a point dropped on Boston, and that is to suggest that the contents in this resource are related to that geographic location. Either the data was collected there or the project is based there. If I want to get rid of this, I can just hit this. And if I want to add new coverage, go back to Boston, which is where I'm based. Say I wanted to create a box coverage. So if I wanted to say, all of Massachusetts is where this data is collected or is related to this geographic area. You can see that HydroShare autofills the corner points of the box, latitude and longitude, or I can just keep it as a point and save my changes. If there is a temporal start and end date associated with the data collection or the project, you can add that here. And here is the content section. So you can see in this content section, I have a folder and an Excel sheet with random integers in it called randint. I can add more metadata at the file level. And if I want to add more files, I can click Add Files and it will browse my computer, or I can drag and drop contents into this section and any file extension is accepted. There are no limitations on what can be stored in HydroShare. So, a file agnostic data repository. If you wanted to upload pictures of your site, for example, you could do that here as well as some content types that automatically aggregate, such as Esri-shaped files. And HydroShare will aggregate them and extract metadata and display it for you. You can also add links to your content section, but it's worth noting that content sections that contain links cannot be submitted for permanent publication because HydroShare cannot guarantee that what's on the other end of that link will remain stable and maintained in perpetuity. Additional metadata, you can add key value pairs. And this is a recently added feature called Related Geospatial Features. And this links your data to other data sets in the same geospatial area. So I can say, I want to know all of the HUC2s that intersect my data. And you can see that it has identified this HUC as one that intersects my data. So now I can go and select this HUC2. And when I go to view my resource, it will display on the metadata template that this is the HUC2 that my data set exists in. Related resources. If your resource is the data for a publication, you can say, this resource is referenced by and include the citation for your paper, creating a closed loop between your paper and your data. But note, if you want to do this, your data should be either published or public. At the bottom is your citation. So this resource is currently private because it's just a teaching resource, but I can copy this citation. And if I do decide to publish this resource, it's letting me know that this will be my DOI. So it doesn't have a DOI yet, but it's letting me know that that will ultimately be the DOI. And then you can select a license. The default license in HydroShare is Creative Commons. So now I'm going to show you quickly how to manage who has access to your resource. You can see that there are two owners right now, me and my friend Emily Clark, who works at Quasi. And we are both owners, but I could change my own sharing status, for example, to viewer or editor, or add another user here if I wanted to. So our technical director, Martin Sewell, I could make him an editor, owner, or viewer. And here you can change it from private to discoverable to public, or enable private link sharing for anonymous reviewers to access your resource. All right, back to the slides. So another resource that Quasi offers is apps that are integrated with HydroShare. With your HydroShare account, you get a free MATLAB Online license and access to Quasi Jupyter Hub, as well as HydroShare on Jupyter if you join the Quasi Cloud Computing group. And we make you join a group just to make sure you're not like mining Bitcoin with Quasi Jupyter Hub. But MATLAB Online offers you a free MATLAB license and computing environment, and Quasi Jupyter Hub similarly is a cloud computing environment with several server options that are listed here: Python, R, RStudio. And all of them integrate with HydroShare. So if you have a Jupyter notebook and a HydroShare resource, you can open the Jupyter notebook directly from the resource landing page into Jupyter Hub and run that notebook, and then save your results back to your resource. The Discover page has a lot of different filter options, and you can discover any data that is stored in HydroShare that is discoverable, public, or published. And there's free text search, geographic coverage. Say you only wanted to look at Jupyter notebooks, or you only wanted time series data, you could filter by data type. There are many ways to get more information about how to use HydroShare. Written documentation is available at help@hydroshare.org. We also have a series of short YouTube videos on our YouTube channel called HydroShare How To. And this was really like a whirlwind introduction to how to use HydroShare. But if you would like a longer introduction to HydroShare webinar or a hands-on workshop for your organization or lab, you can feel free to reach out to me at help@quasi.org or ccogswell@quasi.org. Both go to me, and I'd be more than happy to have a longer conversation or help you with your data management needs one-on-one if you need that. And I'll stop sharing my screen now. But yeah, thank you. Let me know if you have any questions during the question period.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was a fascinating presentation. Next up, we have Ilya Zaslavsky, who is the director of the Spatial Information Systems Lab at the San Diego Supercomputer Center at UC San Diego. Ilya is also a TGR co-PI, and he's going to present on spatial data analysis.
Good morning, everybody. So I'll talk about spatial analysis and how it is used. This is a huge topic and a huge market, which is expected to grow to more than 130 billion in 5 years. There are lots of big and small companies in this space. Government agencies publish spatial data and use GIS tools for analysis, not to mention nonprofits and citizen scientists. This is a very widely used approach. And now that a lot of spatial data are free and easy to get, and a lot of free spatial data software is available, these approaches are used everywhere. So my name is Ilya Zaslavsky. I run Spatial Information Systems Lab at SDSC, and a lot of my work is about spatial data and spatial analysis in different contexts. One of the projects that you might have heard of is Hydrologic Information System, or Quasi-Hydrologic Information System. That was a predecessor of the HydroShare that you have just heard about. And that system developed technology for accessing hydrologic data via services using water markup language version 1. Then eventually I served as co-chair of hydrology domain working group at OGC, which developed water markup language version 2, which is now international standard for water data exchange. On the same slide, you can see that spatial relationships can be analyzed at other scales, such as the scale of the brain. But the same principles apply. You want to share and integrate information about locations, including gene expression data, and integrate data across multiple models of the brain. The core idea, how you generate insights based on analysis of geographic features and relationships between them, and how you figure out the processes that influence these patterns and their dynamics. In other words, you just want to look at the patterns of relationships that you observe, see how it changes, and interpret that as attribute that to the processes that you want to understand. Normally, you organize different data as layers, and this is what is shown here in this picture. These layers would reflect hydrology and hydrogeology, but would also depict some elements of natural environment and human activity layers. All of these may have influence on groundwater, and looking at how the objects on these layers are collocated in space would give you an idea of the interrelationships in the system. There are lots of details that you need to keep in mind if we want to integrate data based on spatial properties. How data are represented? Are these objects individual objects such as houses or roads in the road network, or fields such as elevation map? Do we have the data for the same time periods? And if not, what problems in the downstream analysis it may cause? How often this data are updated? Do we work with model-generated data because we can't really observe aquifers on the ground, but we can model them? And this comes with certain level of accuracy, which we can estimate for every layer that we have in this picture. Are these layers in the same spatial reference system or not, or need some kind of reprojection? So all of these issues are sort of details that you have to look at when you try to publish and analyze spatial data. Next one. So spatial analysis approaches are widely used in the context of transboundary aquifer research. This is the topic of our project. Probably the main source of data is the International Groundwater Resource Assessment Center, which publishes the transboundary aquifers of the world map. This map is updated every year, and a bunch of other data types. In order to, so you can click here and you will see that this map will show locations of aquifers that span political boundaries, and for any of these aquifers, you'll get some information like the countries that are involved and a few additional metadata. You remember the term metadata from what Christine presented earlier. So to do this work, you need to, of course, have domain knowledge, but also understand cartography, geographic information systems, spatial stats, spatial databases, and the list of the components that you need to have in mind. It has been growing. Each of them, of course, actually, each of them is more than one university course. I used to teach cartography and GIS and spatial stats. I know something about other things, but basically to be able to work with this data, you need to have some exposure to these different types of, to the different components of spatial data analysis. The most recent addition has been probably spatial data science. That's an application of data science, machine learning techniques to do spatial analysis, and it's a combination of computer science and statistics and geography, or rather, I would say, spatial disciplines, because the example with brain data is certainly not at the geographic scale. I've been actually teaching spatial data science for 4 years at UCSD, mostly to data science students. And you can get from Amazon that new book that was recently published on GIS for Science that includes a description of how spatial of how data science techniques can be applied to understanding spatial processes and prediction and modeling. This is a kind of very abbreviated list of spatial analysis themes in groundwater hydrology. There are multiple applications of spatial analysis, and I could probably extend this list to multiple slides. In all cases, you're looking at spatial relationship between different phenomena and objects, including geology, hydrology, and hydrogeology, human activity layers, or explore effects of climate change. That's what's shown on this picture on the right, which basically involves understanding how changing precipitation, humidity, and other patterns influence recharge, storage, and discharge, and other layers such as agricultural use, pumping, soils, and so on. And finally, I want to briefly show you one additional type of data that our project brings into the analysis of transboundary aquifers. By the way, you can follow the demo that I'm going to show by going to tinyurl.com/TGR landscape. And this is an application of a system that we developed in-house called SWA for survey analysis via visual exploration. It's a free online system where you can create an account and publish your own data. So one of the goals of our project is to bring together researchers who work on transboundary aquifers around the world. Normally, we go by talking to people and trying to see if they have mutual interest and connecting them in this way. But what if we try to get to find everybody in the world who ever published on transboundary groundwater or transboundary aquifers and organize them into a network so that we can see how this network developed over time. And this is what the system that I'm going to show you does. We can look at individual people here, and let's say if we take folks from a particular country, let's say from Mexico, these are everybody who have published on transboundary groundwater. So these words appear in the abstract or in the title of their papers. For any of them, we have information about whom they have collaborated with and their list of publications. We can, well, eventually show up with abstracts and so on. We can also see where these people are on the map. And this map shows us the relationship between, okay, I'll uncheck Mexico, relationships between researchers and the transboundary aquifers themselves. So I will remove that layer, and you will see that in the US-Mexico border area, there are actually a whole string of aquifers. Each of them will have a name and some description that comes from the eTrack website. And we can see how researchers are, locations of researchers is related to these aquifers. Or we can figure out which researchers have worked on which aquifers. So for example, if you're looking at Limpopo Basin, quite far from the area that we study, but nevertheless, it's an example. You would see that these researchers are mostly in the US, UK, and also quite a few in the area. Limpopo Basin is somewhere. Well, anyway, you can play with this map and see all the different data views that we have, and also the most interesting view that will show you how the network of researchers is organized and which researchers happen to be central to this network, which researchers happen to connect different clusters of research. And for example, you're looking at concepts such as, or at researchers who have worked on sustainability or sustainability of groundwater. You can see how this network has been pretty much non-existent about 30 years ago. And then moving the slider, you can see how people started to connect with each other, how some clusters started to grow because researchers from other countries have joined, or they have joined with other clusters. And you can compute how different researchers have become more or less central to the system, so-called centrality indexes such as betweenness or key player fragmentation for specific people. So this is yet another way of doing analysis of people in space and on a network, and a new data type that can be further used in spatial analysis. On that note, I really would encourage you to play with this application and let us know what you think, and then we'll go into questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ilya, for that great presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to West Hub Deputy Director Catherine Kramer, who's going to lead the Q&A session.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and thank you to all of our panelists. Great presentations. I first just want to ask amongst the panelists, do you have comments or questions for each other before we get into the questions that are in the chat from the audience? But if you have anything you want to discuss amongst yourselves, but that we can listen in on, that would be great.
I just want to say I really enjoyed the other presentations, and they were nicely related, even though we hadn't coordinated that way exactly. Ilya, I did want to ask, so, especially with the slide up, when you were correlating the researchers to the aquifers, informally, would you say that there's some understudied transboundary aquifers out there?
There are 582 aquifers as of last accounting, transboundary aquifers. And you will see in this application that there are about 800 people altogether who have published on that. So chances are that the majority of aquifers are understudied or not studied at all. I am not saying that there should be one-to-one or many-to-one relationship, but frankly, that was one of the biggest discoveries, that there are not that many people in the world who study this topic.
Well,
and also they're quite fragmented.
Well, and if you looked at how many millions of people rely on these transboundary aquifers for their life, really, that's kind of scary. So to the people on the call, there's lots of place to break new ground, pun intended.
Absolutely. Ilya, I know you have a time constraint, so maybe we'll get to a question for you. Speaking, this is from William. And since you are talking about international networking internationally, how do the databases handle other languages? And the example he gives is that an aquifer in Greek translates to underground lake. So how do you deal with the challenge of different languages gathering all this from globally?
It's a big challenge, and the database, the bibliographic database we're using is called OpenAlex, and it indexes about 400 million publications from all over the world. So it's not only English language. If we have English language abstracts of the papers, then chances are that they would translate the underground lake into something that we can process as an aquifer. Also, OpenAlex itself uses an AI-based text parsing algorithm and keyword assignment algorithm that would classify papers based on the frequency of words that they find in the paper, and they may assign aquifer label to the paper. Of course, it will not be transboundary aquifer, but something that we can consider. So there's no direct answer to that question with respect to Greek language, but when I showed you examples of papers here, you would see that some papers are in Spanish and some abstracts are in Spanish, but we still can attribute them to transboundary aquifer, transboundary groundwater. So it's very rapidly developing field, and it is covering more and more languages as we know.
Ilya, a couple more questions for you just came in. How do you gather the data and do a quality check? And also, what about building a centralized or decentralized observatory database?
So quality checks take about 95% of the time. You need to have undergraduate students who would do that, because otherwise it's impossible. And you need to have CT, because CT is fantastic. She can spot problems very quickly with the data. The problem with quality checks is that from the papers, we have authors and co-authors as they decided to put themselves in that specific paper. So there's no guarantee that the same person would not be spelled in multiple different ways with middle initials or without middle initials. We have some algorithms for how to disambiguate such situations, but they are not, of course, 100% foolproof. So some manual curation is required. Not to mention that when we are trying to find photographs of people, that is also done via image search by names and affiliations. Not mention that affiliations can change, and affiliations can be written as UCSD or UC San Diego or University of California, San Diego, or in multiple other ways. So it is indeed a big problem. Means of gathering studied but unpublished data. What do you mean unpublished data these days? People can publish their data on GitHub. They can put it on their hard drives. They can put it into some data repository, but not have a published paper associated with that. In that case, as long as the data not in the form of published articles. Okay, good. If they are somehow indexed by data repositories, then we have a way to harvest information from those data repositories. That is a different project, not the project that I showed. And that project is what Christine can talk about a lot more. It's called Geocodes. Now there's a new name because NSF has just funded an extension of that project. That project harvests multiple repositories of geoscience-related data sets, not necessarily paper attached, they're not necessarily attached to publication. But when we're trying to build a network like that, we want to, obviously, any additional data that we can use to build a network like that would be helpful. Perhaps co-authorship on patents, co-authorship on publishing data sets. But we haven't yet gotten there. We just are trying to build these for co-authorship based on publications, because that is 400 million data sets, 400 million publications, data sets, which just became available last year. And it's a huge resource that we still need to explore.
Great. Thank you, Ilya. Clara, there's a whole string of questions.
Yes, I saw that. Thank you for the questions.
Yeah. Does HydroShare accept the large amount of historical hydrological data from reports and other sources? Is one question. So to kind of understand, I will answer this question to kind of like in the way that I'm understanding what you're asking. HydroShare does not like mine data and pull it into its system. The depositor of the data manually puts the data in HydroShare. And then regardless of sharing status, ownership of the data stays at the depositor level, no matter, who can access it or how broadly it's available. So HydroShare, yes, does accept historical data. And we have a lot of historical data that is stored in HydroShare. Sometimes a project ends, a really large project will end, and they'll come to us and say, we have a lot of legacy data. And we, basically it's kind of it'll be a data rescue project where they say, we have 30 years of historical data and we need to store it. We need to make sure that it's available. We did this for the CZO the Critical Zone Observatories project, and now we're the hub for the Critical Zone Collaborative Network, Quasi is. And so the answer is yes, historical data certainly can be stored and deposited in HydroShare, and it often is. And many people, at the conclusion of their project do just put all of their data in HydroShare and make it available and describe it with robust metadata. Great. A few more for you. Is it capable, are the data from HydroShare capable of being used in, for example, Esri GIS by downloading it? Yeah, okay, so something I took out of my presentation because I was trying to stay within 10 minutes was a video of Esri shape files automatically aggregating in HydroShare. So if you go to the Discover page and you filter by Esri shape files, you can download pre-aggregated Esri shape files and then, upload that and open them in Esri software. And similarly, you can put, as long as you have the DBF, the SHX, and the shape file at minimum, if you put them in HydroShare in your resource, HydroShare will say, oh, that's Esri files, and will aggregate them and extract the relevant metadata and display it for anyone who wants to take a look at that data so that they know kind of what is in it before they download it. And then anyone can download those shape files and open them in Esri software. Thanks. There's a couple that are from two different people, but they're related about formatting. Can they be, so obviously data sets might be in different formats, but can they be gathered into one data set? in a Excel spreadsheet, Access database, or does each measurement need to be entered into a specified format?
Yeah, so the nice thing about HydroShare is that it is file agnostic. And if you upload, for example, time series data as a CSV, it does not need to adhere to a specific upload template. We have another database called Hydrologic Information Systems that has an extremely stringent upload template with a controlled vocabulary that is separate from HydroShare. And in that one, it does have to be in a very specific format. But HydroShare, you can upload, if you upload your time series data as an ODM2 SQLite file, HydroShare will ingest it, recognize it as time series data, and display it as time series data, but you don't need to upload it that way. You saw kind of in my example, I had an Excel sheet with a random integer Excel sheet, right? You could similarly put all of your data in that Excel sheet, and you could include a README file that says, and this is best practice to include a README file as well, that says, you know, these are the variables present in this data. And if you upload that README file with the title README and it's a TXT or a Markdown file, HydroShare will actually display it on the page without anyone having to click into it or download it. So you can upload in any format. It doesn't need to be in a specific format. There are some formats that are more readily recognized by HydroShare, but it'll accept any format.
And a final question, are you familiar with the New Mexico water data, and how does WASI relate to that effort, if so?
So we're not, as far as I know at this present moment, HydroShare is not integrated with this group, but I will say we do frequently receive requests from people to integrate, for example, their groundwater modeling platform or something with HydroShare through our API. So for example, we did a project recently with someone who developed a groundwater modeling software, and they actually with I think it was in New Mexico, but they wanted to be able to push their modeling results directly into a HydroShare resource through our API. And we helped them integrate their software with our API. So we are always open to collaborations, but as far as I know, with this specific group, we're not currently doing any ongoing projects.
And I know I said that question was the last one, but there is one other that's, is HydroShare data georeferenced?
So HydroShare data can be georeferenced in the sense that, and I hope I'm understanding your question correctly, whether or not data is georeferenced depends on how robustly the depositor describes their data. And there's a lot of reasons why we leave this up to the depositor. But you can georeference your data in HydroShare through the metadata template and in various other ways. And it would take like a whole other tutorial if you wanted me to explicitly show you how to do that. But I will say it's up to the depositor whether the data becomes georeferenced or whether that's relevant to the data that is being stored, because many different types of data are stored in HydroShare. But I will say that you can georeference your data, or to a certain extent, you can relate the data that is stored in your resource to a geographic location. I think there was one part of another question that I was going to respond to, but I forgot to. And the question was can multiple data types be grouped into one resource? The answer is yes. You can put, you will decide how you chunk your data in a HydroShare resource. And some people say, all right, this is all the data from this site, the time series data, all of the other data from this specific field site. And then you can create a collection within HydroShare that relates all of your different field sites together. Or you can say, this is all of the time series data from my project, and this is all the geophysical data from my project, right? So you can store geophysical data and time series data in the same resource, or you can separate it out based on how you want people to interact with the data and how you expect them to use and interact with the data that you've decided to store in HydroShare. So yes.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you, Ilya and Christine, all of our panelists for your great presentations, and to our audience for great questions. And Ashley, I'm going to turn it back over to you for our second panel.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you to Christine, Claire, and Ilya for your wonderful presentations, like Catherine mentioned, and for the engaging discussion. Their presentations are going to be posted on the TGR website alongside a recording of this entire event if you want to go back and look at that. So in the second hour, we're going to be hearing from our career development panel. Each panelist is going to have a few minutes to answer predetermined questions, which will be moderated by Julie Christopher of the San Diego Supercomputer Center in the West Hub. And then we're going to move into a Q&A session, which will be moderated by Catherine. For anyone that is just now joining us, my name is Ashley Atkins. I'm the Executive Director of the West Big Data Innovation Hub and a co-PI on the Transboundary Groundwater Resilience Network. This event today is hosted by TGR. TGR is a project funded by the National Science Foundation's ExcelNet program, and it aims to connect and leverage the strengths of water, data, social, and systems science to catalyze transformative change for transboundary groundwater systems. This project is led by Principal Investigator Sam Fernald at the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute. We're going to go ahead and add some links to the chat now so that you can learn more about TGR and upcoming events and opportunities. I also wanted to give a big thank you to Christine Tang of the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute, who planned this entire event. All the credit goes to her. She's just feeling under the weather today, so we're stepping in to help run some of the logistics. And we'll also go ahead and post a link now where you can access the extended biographies of today's panelists. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Julie. Each of our panelists is going to have time during the first question to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate the introduction. I'm going to start with the first question for each of the panelists. We'll go alphabetically by Ali, Karen, Karine, and then Nick. So first, may you please introduce yourself and give a brief account of your journey, what you studied during your university higher education career, what was your first job, and so forth. So I'll start with Ali first.
Hello, this is Ali Saysal. I joined from Istanbul now. How I became a water researcher, groundwater researcher. I studied industrial engineering. So I studied mostly operations research and some data during my BS. And then after that, I studied environmental sciences and resource management. Later on, I've been into the field of system dynamics, that's socioeconomic modeling of complex dynamic problems. And then through that journey, I started to work on water resources. And then this happened, this happened during my PhD studies quite long ago, I would say like 25 years ago. At that time, I was in Turkey and was interested in dealing with public issues, public resource and environmental issues rather than corporate problems, having a BS in industrial engineering. And then during those times, the big water development scheme in southeast of Turkey, that is Southeastern Anatolian Project, was a big public issue. So rather, not from a modeling perspective, but more from an environmentalist perspective and then more from a public concern, that I became involved in the debate in Southeastern Anatolian Project. And then later on, I found my way to develop my interest in more academic terms. And then I studied the comprehensive environmental analysis of this project during my PhD years. And then the methodology that I adopted was system dynamics, that is socioeconomic modeling of complex dynamic problems. That's how I started. And then I've been involved in, later on, I've been involved in different type of projects, but I guess how I started this is fair enough to explain how I started my career as a water resources modeler or as an academic who's interested in water resources management.
Thank you, Ali. I will go on to Karen next. I'll repeat it real quick. May you please introduce yourself and give a brief account of your journey, what you've studied during your university or higher education career, and what was your job thereafter?
Thank you very much. My name is Karen Wilholt. I'm At the moment, a freelance consultant. I have my own company called Water Cycle Innovation. So I'm not in academic, but I'm sort of in the field of water very broadly. But basically my full career, which is also more than 25 years, has been in groundwater. And I guess that's why I'm also invited to this session. So I'm very pleased to be part of it. And I am originally from Denmark. I started my studies there. I have a master's in environmental hydrogeology, and another one in hydraulics and computational science. And then I have chemical engineering background as well. And my PhD was basically then switching to groundwater. And from then on, it has been groundwater most of my career. I started, of course, working in Denmark, where I did very sort of technical studies, modeling, and very much along what we've been discussing in the previous hour, data and putting information together and understanding the resource and so on in a more physical sense. But I was very interested in development already back then. And I also observed that there wasn't that much research and that much capacity around groundwater in the developing countries. And Denmark is a country using only groundwater. We only use 100% groundwater. So we have a lot of expertise. And I thought there's a need for somebody like me out there when I sort of got a little further down my career path. And I thought that was the way I should go. And then luckily I was headhunted to work for IMI, the International Water Management Institute in Sri Lanka at that time. And I worked for them for 3 years, and I got very fascinated by how groundwater fits into all kinds of basically issues around water, and going beyond that into food, into security, into transboundary cooperation, and all of these things. And so I sort of developed skills in many of these fields to see how we can basically increase the knowledge and the capacity. I also have done quite a bit of teaching and capacity development in my career. So lately I was involved in a large capacity or a large network, a platform around groundwater called GWIP, Groundwater Solutions Initiative for Policy and Practice, which was spearheaded by IMI, but I was sort of chairing it, where we had 30 different international organizations and associations and so on, with mandate and expertise in groundwater involved. And it was very much a way to highlight the role of groundwater in development and get the work of hydrogeologists into more applied science and see, you know, the socioeconomic and so on aspects of groundwater, which is I think becoming so much more important at present. So I think we'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Dr. Kemper.
Thank you very much. My name is Karen Kemper, and as you can hear from my accent and saw in the CV, I'm German. But before I started my my academic studies, I had actually spent a year as an exchange student living in Brazil. And so there, I got really, really interested in development issues and in economics issues. What makes a country tick? When do you have development and when do you not have development? So my first studies that I embarked on were on a blend of economics and business administration in Germany. But then I also had this other side where I was very, very interested in languages, and like many Europeans and probably everyone who's there, by the time you get out of high school, you already speak 2 or 3 or 4 languages or something. So I already spoke Swedish at the time, and so I heard about a Swedish program where you had business administration and international economics, and you had French built into the studies. So I switched to there, And there I did the dissertation of my Bachelor of Science studies in Senegal on a rural water supply project and on how especially women's groups were working to maintain hand pumps, put them together themselves, and what the economic outcome for them was. That's how I got hooked into the entire water question. And then eventually studied at a PhD college at my university in Sweden, studied something that was a multidisciplinary track, which was called at the time Water and Environmental Studies. But my colleagues there would be all kinds of things. So I was an economist, there were political scientists, there were chemists, there were biologists, and everybody was looking at water from different angles. And so fast forward a bit, I got to do a summer internship at the World Bank on the water side, water economic side, and they said, well, there are so few water economists, would you consider coming here, spending 2 years here? And I said yes, and it's up to this day, there are very, very few water economists, especially water resources. You have some on the water supply side, but very little on water resources. And eventually I entered their career program where for the first 10 years, I would guess, I worked on all kinds of water resources, including groundwater. I ended up leading the World Bank's groundwater management advisory team, which was a SWAT team that did a bit what Karen was referring to, because there is actually very little pragmatic management work on groundwater. You have a lot of deep studies, but then how will you manage it? What does it mean for people? What's the social side of it, the economic side of it? Often you don't have that much. So that SWAT team was, again, interdisciplinary, and they would work anywhere in the world. And so over time, I broadened out to various environmental things and managerial things. And my last position was as the global director for environment, natural resources, and blue economy in the World Bank, by definition of a global position, and where I could draw on a lot that I knew about water and water resources and management of natural resources. And then I decided last year I would retire from the World Bank, and I'm currently focusing on blue economy, that is oceans, things, and biodiversity finance. And perhaps one last word is, when I started some 30 years ago, I would not have thought that we would now be in a position where we say there's such great urgency on the natural resources side. I think we were all thinking that with the right tools, we would be able to manage water issues, forest issues, the climate issues that were starting to be discussed. And I think we all thought we would be in a better place today. And instead we have this urgency, and that's where you all come in, who are embarking on your careers, because there's really a lot to do in all these areas, and of course, groundwater in particular. So I leave it here.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Next, we'll go to Nick.
Hi, yes. Hi, everybody. Thanks, thanks TGR for inviting me on such a prestigious international panel. I'm underqualified compared to my compatriots here on the panel, but my name is Nick Martirano. I work for the California State Water Resources Control Board, which is the state agency that is in charge of regulating surface and groundwater quality in California, as well as protecting its beneficial uses. I am the Assistant Deputy Director for the Office of Information Management Analysis and the Director for the Water Quality Monitoring Council in California. So when I started my undergraduate work, I was really enamored with the National Geographic type shows. I was super into being like, I had this picture in my mind of becoming a marine biologist. At the time, Shark Week had just started. So I was really sold on this idea. I really had this fixated in my mind. I'd be on this glamorous trip on boats and tagging sharks or saving sea turtles. I went and did some research on the universities that were on the West Coast. I really didn't want to leave California. I'm sort of a California stuck here. And the best opportunity at the time was at University of California, Santa Barbara. They had an aquatic biology degree, which was a combination of fresh and marine biology in one program. And at the time, they were just building the Bren School, which is now a pretty world-renowned environmental sciences school at the University of California, Santa Barbara. When I went and did my undergraduate school there, it was really just the basic kind of hard sciences with the labs, science, chemistry, with almost like a pre-med style in the beginning. And then they had the final 2 years, all brought in the limnology, evolutionary morphology, and that sort of work. But when I did graduate there, I was at like an impasse. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, kind of my picture, even though I interned at several different labs while on campus. It didn't seem like I didn't really want to get into the whole research game, which is what it seemed like if you wanted to do that sort of National Geographic style of work, you needed to go into academia and focus on a few specific research questions. I became more interested in trying to make and affect change in our policies. My first job was just as a water quality sampler for like a local water company that did it for consultants or construction companies that were trying to comply with their permitting. I wasn't really happy with that, so I looked into grad school to try to see if I could kind of open up my options. And I was trying to take a different tact. I went away from sort of the hard science programs and looked more at some of the social sciences, and ended up going to a program in San Diego State University, which was focused on Latin America. And my thought there was I could work with partners in Mexico to try to improve or study and improve maybe some of their fisheries management, kind of learn about the intergovernmental relationships there. It was while taking my graduate school that I took an environmental law course that really kind of opened my mind to how you really affect change within the United States, specifically in a state, and how you design environmental policy and how that really can make consumers change, industry change. And that's really where my kind of thoughts shifted. I then took an internship with the United States EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. They have a border program down in San Diego that does cross-border work and focus a lot of my work on their water quality programs. And that gave me a lot of insight into how the federal government operated, how we worked with other countries, especially across boundaries. And following that internship, which was about a year long, I graduated from San Diego State and then got a job with the State Water Board. And I've been here for 16 years or so, still here. Been moving around programs. The best part about the Water Board is that they have many different programs. So what I started off in TMDL, total maximum daily load, and regulatory action development, and moved on to Clean Water Act in integrated report work. And now I'm doing more of a collaboratory type of work with finding partners within the water quality space and sharing data and making sense of the data and communicating that data into information. And that's where I'm at now. Thank you.
Thank you all for that answering that first question. For the second question, there was two more. So the second one is, looking back, what do you wish you had known as a student or an early career professional? And consequently, what advice would you give students and early career professionals starting their career now? And then we'll go in the same order. So we'll start with Ali.
Thank you, Julie. I'll try to answer this question as a systems scientist rather than a hardcore groundwater scientist or water scientist. What I've been looking into is the drivers, pressures, and responses for sustainable groundwater management in my career. And then the research, my research has more intensified over the last couple of years with my partnership with the Mediterranean researchers to manage the aquifers, mostly in the Mediterranean region in Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and to the south of Mediterranean in Tunisia, Morocco, and etc. And during my collaboration with the colleagues in this participation, I noticed the value of working with hardcore groundwater scientists, with people who are very much acquainted with data science and water resource processes. And then in my early career, I didn't have this chance. I was working on drivers, pressures, and responses. I was working on sustainable water resources management. I was working on conservation issues, but more as a social systems modeler and researcher. And then I was in touch with field experts, domain experts, to the extent that I needed some crucial fundamental information. Now I value more my collaboration with field experts, groundwater scientists, hydrologists, geologists. So what I would recommend to early career people, young people, as a systems scientist, as someone who is interested in sustainability, resilience, and management aspects of this problem, is to collaborate, be in strong touch with experts in geology, hydrology, and data sciences, so that they can build higher quality models which are more relevant to the needs of the water, not only the water experts, but also the water organizations as well. Moreover, what I see is nowadays, particularly in management, participatory approaches are very much valued. So what I would recommend is to follow ways to conduct participatory research as a problem, as you try to identify problems, ask the questions, whose problems actually are we dealing with? Whose perspectives really matter the way I define and analyze the problem? So explore all ways of doing participatory research, explore all ways of valuing data, which is, as we have listened to in the previous panel, is very much valued, and then there has been lots and lots of advances in data sciences which can help modelers as well. So these I would say I would value in my early career if I had opportunities to be acquainted with, and then how I would what I would recommend to early career people in water resources management.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Karen.
Yes, thank you. I actually had to think quite hard about this question because, yeah, it's hard to be, looking back and say, how would you have liked to change your life and your career? Because when I look back, I would not really like to change so much. So I'm pretty pleased with sort of how my path has shaped up and what I've been able to experience and learn and achieve and so on. But let me come up with a few things that might be useful for especially young careers professionals. And maybe some of the points that I feel was useful for me and made me sort of progress. So one thing is be good at what you're doing, basically. Have a good academic foundation in the field that you're working in. And it's not so critical if you are very narrow in your specialty, because it's good to have a very solid foundation in one field. And it's easier to become broader, I would say, as you progress and mature in your field. And it's actually coming naturally to sort of work with other disciplines and so on as you go along, and you can contribute with your field. So I think that's my first sort of recommendation, is to look at having a very strong foundation in one sort of research field. Another thing that I don't know if I would have liked to have known it, but I think I already was aware, but it's sort of something that is coming more and more to the fore as you grow more experienced. And that's a fact that science is not just very, factual and evidence-based, and it actually has to be interpreted, and the way that it's being interpreted and used depends on the people that have the information and the data and the knowledge and so on. And so even though I said it's important to be very focused and very sort of good at one thing, we also have to be very clear and conscious about the fact that people may interpret it differently and use it differently. And so be part of the dialogue, be part of the discussion, and try to really strive for, applying the data in the best, possible way, and not misusing it. And then I think you also said, Ali, the collaboration aspects, I think, is very important. And it should not only come as you sort of, become professional, or, you have a certain number of years of experience. I think, and even today, there's a lot of opportunities for students and young professionals to come together within their field. And actually, I'm just going to put now a link in the chat box, which relates to the Groundwater Youth Network. And I would encourage anyone that are particularly interested in groundwater and find this, potentially important or interesting, to join such a group. And there are lots of other opportunities out there for young people, which was not there for us. So that was maybe one thing that I would have liked to see more of as I was an early career person. So thank you for that.
Thank you. We'll go to Dr. Kemper next.
Thank you. Well, I would agree with everything that Karen and Ali have said. So maybe just a few brief additional points. I was also trying to think of what I would have wanted people to tell me I should have done or could have, that where in hindsight I would have known. I couldn't fully come up with anything, but during my time as a manager, number of things tended to come up. And so maybe drawing on that, one is the multidisciplinarity. When I decided to do my PhD in a multidisciplinary setting, at that time that wasn't very well accepted. But now there are so many more courses of study where you can do that. And I would really encourage that. I fully agree with Karen that it is important that one has one area that one really knows and dominates, and where one is really good, but where one keeps an open mind and knowledge in other areas in order to be able to create synergies, because otherwise you lose a lot of what you could be doing and what you want to be doing in the world, because you're on a very narrow track. So to strike that balance between multidisciplinarity while keeping your core and be known perhaps for the core thing that you do well, I think that would be a really good thing. And the other thing is, not so sure if it applies to the group here, but in my case, I was very lucky. As I said, I wanted to study economics and ended up in a subfield of institutional economics as it relates to water resources and natural resources. But that type of studies has, I call it a toolbox. And just as you would have a toolbox in systems analysis and in engineering, there are certain tools that you learn that you can keep applying in different settings and different questions, different countries or different sectors and so on. But the toolbox always goes with you, and at the same time opens up where you can work and what you can do. And I think you've heard from all of us how we have been meandering between different things, but somehow in a way taking that toolbox that was the original one with us, and maybe have updated it and expanded it. And sometimes I have been contacted by students who said, well, I'm planning to study political science or social social science or communications, and then I want to work in developing countries. And then my question is, what is your toolbox? Where would you specialize within that in order to contribute to what you really want to do? And that I think is an important question that one needs to ask oneself. And because if one does something early in one's career, early in one's studies, where one has that type of tools that one can apply, then one can also expand into the other things. And I find that very important. And for a number of the younger people, that hadn't been quite clear, because yes, if you want to be a journalist, you want to write, then political science, they can be absolutely fantastic. Or if you want to be an academic, but if you have that ability of analysis, but not necessarily of providing advice to a government, a local government or something, then you might end up being frustrated. So that is where I find that one needs to see what one wants to do with things. And that I thought would have been useful if someone had said to me early on, except that I stumbled into the thing I actually wanted to do just by chance. And leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Next is Nick.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree with all my fellow panelists. I guess what I would say is don't limit yourself to what any preconceived ideas of what you think you want to do. Just be open to new ideas. So don't necessarily wall yourself in. Take classes and join groups that touch on the social sciences as well. So you kind of get an idea of what's really happening on the ground. Look around at local non-governmental organizations or community groups that are kind of in the sphere that intersects with some of your passions, and kind of reach out and get involved, and it'll probably open your eyes at some of the things that maybe you wouldn't get exposed to in your normal day-to-day classwork or university experience, or even as you kind of start your career, your professional career. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I would say that if you haven't already, start taking and really honing your data science skills. Skills like R, Python, GIS are in huge demand, especially, well, across the board, but especially in the government sector. A lot of us, even in my age group, and I'm 41, that those options weren't available when we were in university. So those types of skills are what we want to see and what we're hiring for, and are often skills that are going to be put you above somebody else. We have so much data available and coming in on a day-to-day, second-by-second basis, that what we're struggling with is how to make sense of it, and how to effectively take that data and turning it into information that can be communicated across communities, not just the academics, not just the policy writers, but the people that are most impacted. Ali kind of hit on this, but you want to be clear on what your management question is, and start to kind of shift your lens to thinking what community is being most impacted by these environmental concerns, and are you communicating with them? Is your research question or management question in line with what's most important to that community? Thinking like tribes or lower income communities that are disadvantaged. Those are really important. And it would be great to get experience with communicating results and information across those communities. So, again, I think a lot of that work can come from more of the social science work, communication work, things that you wouldn't necessarily find on your curriculum for a hard science degree. But those would definitely be classes or skills that I would encourage young students and early career professionals to start working on, because that is kind of the environment that we're moving towards. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you all. The last question kind of builds off of the second one. It is, what advice do you have for students or early career professionals on disciplinary work? So we'll go in the same order.
Well, the way I answered the second question actually mostly answered the third question. That's what I understand. Right now, I work on mostly on water-stressed regions. That's the Mediterranean basin, which is water-stressed. And in many cases, the extractions much exceed the recharge rate, so the piezometrics heads are declining, and this is putting significant stress on communities who make use of those resources, and then triggers side problems related to water quality issues like seawater intrusion, or if the water is mostly used for agricultural purposes, and that's the case in many Mediterranean areas, there is diffuse pollution impacting water resources and so on and so forth. And then when you look into this, when you look into these problems, so the obvious solution is mostly there, that the obvious solution is on the demand side rather than the supply side. That is, the water resource use should be reduced to alleviate the stress on the aquifers. Nowadays, nature-based solutions is a quite fashionable or contemporary option that the researchers are exploring. But the obvious solution is there. It's mostly on the demand side rather than the supply side. So we use better technologies. We try to better monitor the water heads. We try to improve the efficiency in water use, that we try to benefit from lesser amount of water extracted per unit of economic benefit that we acquire from those resources, etc. So we focus on technological innovation, technological efficiency in water use, as well as better monitoring the water resources, etc. So these are all happening on the engineering and water resources engineering aspects of the problem, but the solution is on the demand side. And then this looks like a very messy problem. It's a bit like the climate change. The obvious solution is not to burn the fossil fuel, but we don't know how to exactly reduce the amount of fossil fuel that we are burning, and then there are lots of socioeconomic complexities as we delve into this problem. So the groundwater sustainability, groundwater resilience problem is in a way similar to the climate change problem. It's mostly a demand side problem, but it's a messy problem because although we can come up with some obvious solutions, it's very difficult to understand how these solutions can be implemented because of common pool resource nature of the groundwaters, because of the public good nature of groundwater resource provision or conservation problems, and so on and so forth. So what I would recommend is, again, more from a socioeconomic side and then more from a sustainability and resilience side of the groundwater problem, that we, the groundwater researchers or water researchers, or we, the resource management researchers, as well as the young colleagues who are hearing us. After all, I myself is learning lots and lots in each project that I'm involved in. So I would consider myself as a student of these things as well, but that I can maybe, if I may, I can recommend something to the early career people as well, that we should, I think, be knowledgeable on the socioeconomic complexities that makes the demand side problem complex and then hard to offer practical solutions to reduce the water use, extractions, water resources. So we should, I think, improve, again, getting back to my previous comment, we should know ways to build participatory research protocols, get involved with communities as we try to understand and solve their problems. We must find ways to convince people that what we are doing is relevant, and then the suggestions that we may be offering them is actually valid, so that they can try to implement those solutions. So from problem identification to the conceptualization of things, if this is a model conceptualization, to its validation and implementation aspects. Through all this prolonged research process, I think participation, building trust with people so that they believe in what we are doing as we approach these problems is important. Yeah, so to sum up, like I can say, firstly, understand the socioeconomic complexity, so the multiple incentives that different stakeholders can have, different behaviors that they can adopt regarding groundwater use. So this literacy is important, but also during a research process, participation and building trust with communities is also important. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Karen.
I guess the question around transdisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity, that's made across this, they use different words. I don't really distinguish between them as such, because I think it's more or less the same issue. But if other people think differently, I'm interested in hearing more about that. But I think the reason why that question came up is exactly what Karen was also saying, that this is now almost like mainstream when we do research, conscious about the fact that we need to not only look at our own discipline, and we need to involve other disciplines in our research and in the application, as well as Ali was talking about. I'm talking more a little from the research team, if you like, how we need to bring in different experts from different disciplines to conceptualize the problems, to identify, the research scope and the research approach and the methodologies, the tools, and all of that. And by doing that, we can do a lot better, and we can do a lot more than if we do it individually. And even if we go deep on some of the topics like we were talking about before, I think they will all be much more enriched by including other disciplines. So I think it's a no-brainer in a way that we need to do interdisciplinary research, and I think it's getting so much more accepted and acknowledged today. One thing I think is that, of course, it's not always so easy. It's easier to talk to your peers that understand your terminology and the background of the theory and all of that. So that can be, you're in this comfort zone, but it's important for us to break out of our comfort zone and to be curious. I think curiosity is very important here. We should actually be interested in learning from other disciplines, because, as I said, we can learn so much more, and it really adds to our total picture of the issues. So I would really, recommend and encourage people to reach out to other groups of researchers if you set up a project. And most projects today actually require these things, and they have a better chance of getting funded and so on. So it's all the better to bring in all these aspects. I don't think I will say so much about the linkage in the project. I think Ali said a lot about that we need to use all these skills in terms of integrating with people on the ground, with understanding the different levels of decision making and so on. And that requires also different types of disciplines to do that. And so that's really, really key also in having success with the work and the research and so on. If the research is beyond, just academic, if the work that you're involved in has some goal of achieving change on the ground in terms of having policies change, having people think differently, having people behave differently, and so on. You know, socioeconomics, behavioral science, political science, economics, and all of these things all need to come in beyond groundwater science that we're talking about here today. And then my last point is communication. I think it is so crucial when we do interdisciplinary work to be able to communicate clearly, exactly because of the point that I said before, that we tend to use terms that we're so familiar with in our own field, but we have to realize that not everybody understands them. And so we have to be able to explain in simple terms what they mean and why they're important, and only use them basically when they are really necessary, or try to maybe avoid them altogether, and just use very simple terms that everybody can understand. And it goes for all the sciences, not just the groundwater science or whatever, because we all have that, you know, very sort of siloed way of thinking and terminology and so on. And yeah, I think those were my points to think about. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Kemper, you're next.
So rather than repeating everything that Karen just said and Ali before, let me just give you an example. And I had the chance when I was doing my PhD field work to see the birth, so to speak, of a water resources management agency in the state of Ceará in Brazil, a semi-arid state, as I said before. And their big issue was water allocation. It was they had big intermittent rivers where you could assume, but you never knew, that by the end of the dry season they would run out of water. And so you had the usual consumers, you had some industries, you had agriculture, you had the towns, the cities. And so who do you give the water to when you run out of water from the dams that you have built, but that are not very large? So they created a water resources agency, which today is very well renowned and one of the best run in Brazil. But at that time, they were just in the very beginning. And then you had the engineers and the modelers who said, okay, we are going to model the basin. How much water is there? We will use stochastics to see how much there could be in probability in a given year and all of that. And then you, the social scientists, they said to the social scientists, you go to the communities and you talk with them and tell them that there needs to be some allocation, and you sort it out with them. Now, fortunately, there was a very seasoned social scientist on that team, and she said, no way, I'm not going to be the one who's going to talk to the communities, and you, the modelers, stay at home in front of your computers, and you don't even hear what people there are saying. You need to know what they're saying because you need to know what you want to model, which speaks to what was said earlier. Like, what is the question that you are asking when you model relevant to the people you are doing it for? And so she said, I go to the field, but only if you go to the field. So they all went, had community meetings, and that way understood what happened upstream, midstream, downstream, how people were handling conflicts when there was too little water and so on. And that's how they were able to develop models that corresponded to reality, but also, this is a while ago, as you can imagine. Today, you would be able to have great models where you could literally on screen show to people what would happen if they chose priority X, Y, or Z, or what they would be doing. So you could actually do just fantastic things nowadays. It was a bit more complicated then. And so I just wanted to give that as a concrete example of what I'm hearing that we all are talking about, and why it's important that you don't say, oh, I'm the systems person and the modeler, and you are the social scientist. I don't even need to know what you are doing because you know what you're doing. No, it all comes together, and that's how you really can change reality for people and can influence policy and can do all of these things that as a synergy give much more impact. So keep that in mind, that this is real and not just theoretical when you go multidisciplinary and across disciplines. And with that, I turn it over.
Thank you. Thank you for the example too. Next is Nick.
Yeah, I'll be quick, just for the sake of time, but that was a great example that Dr. Kemper just provided, and really just keys in on the importance of working interdisciplinarily. We do it a lot. When I first started at the Water Board as a state agency, we were very much siloed. We would oftentimes our work, whether that be policy development or standards development, was considered like a black box where we would develop the entire thing and then put it out for public comment, take the public comment, respond, and then get it adopted or approved and put into statute. That culture has shifted, and which is a good thing. And now we're before we even start putting pen to paper or key to keyboard, we are working with the local communities through our Office of Public Participation. We are looking for community scientists, data scientists, and getting communication started early, whether that be with the tribes, with the BIPOC communities at large, and just getting their input early before we start working on a policy development, monitoring plan, and just make sure that the questions that we think that we should be asking are appropriate for what the people that are most at risk or are interested as well. So kind of broadening that outlook and scope has been really valuable and is now a point of emphasis at the Water Board. So I fully support getting out there and working with the data scientists. If you're not a data scientist yourself, go to the Code for America pieces, start going to the communities that are in the location that you're working with and establishing connections with leadership, community leaders, tribal leaders, and starting the conversation early. It's important and will make the project a larger success.
Thank you. Panelists, do you have any comments or clarifying questions for one another before I open the Q&A?
No,
No? Okay.
I'm
So
okay.
thank you. Thank you for your questions and comments. We will now open the floor to any questions from the audience. Please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the reactions at the bottom and then wait to be called on. You may also type your question into the chat and I will ask the panelists for you. It looks like we do. Okay, I'll take the question first. Stefano, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, good afternoon, good morning. My question is, okay, let's present myself. I'm from Oxford Sustainable Development Enterprise here in UK, and I'm heavily involved in Mediterranean countries. As Dr. Ali, that I would like to have some conversation, maybe we can exchange the email. Now, the problem in Mediterranean countries, what we realize is that we are working mainly with the concept of WEFE. This means water, energy, food ecosystem. And the idea is, let's give more emphasis on data. We want to build this data observatory in the Mediterranean countries and then exploit the data in order to build the concept of digital twinning on water resource. And here it will come with the idea of not only the participation in a multidisciplinary concept as has been discussed today, but we are using the data that will support us to better understanding the problem, better understanding the people, and better come with solution. So my question is, I do not see so much emphasis on data science, I could say also artificial intelligence and big data in this context. Therefore, using this digital twinning concept into discussion where data could driven the concept of participation and find the solution as I've been discussing, let's say, this evening. So I would like to have some reaction from the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, firstly, it's very good to meet you, Stefano. Obviously, yes, we can share emails. but I don't think that I can give a very good answer to your question because I am not a data scientist. So I am gradually valuing the new approaches to data and then trying to understand how it actually helps us improve water management. Recently, with the Mediterranean partners under Prima Foundation, the Partnership for Resource Research and Innovation in the Mediterranean Area, Prima Foundation, under a Prima Foundation funded project, we are starting a new research on the surface and groundwater interactions, and then how we can actually improve surface water management. And under this project, we have a specific work package on building digital twins. So I hope that I will learn more about that, but I'm not a data scientist. I'm a socioeconomic modeler who does computer-based as well as participatory research. And then I think new data approaches will help us improve water management. That's what I can say at most right now.
Thank you. We're a little tight on time, so I'm gonna try to take this last question really quick. In the chat from Irene to Dr. Kemper, she said she really appreciated how you discussed the need for excellent research and modeling. She's a master's student in environmental policy, and one of the things she's learned is the precautionary principle. Policymakers can't wait to act until they have the perfect scientific evidence if an issue is urgent. I was wondering if any of you ever feel frustrated about the pace of the reaction of policymakers and how you deal with that, or which careers you think are the most useful for speeding up the pace of addressing these critical issues like groundwater resilience.
Yeah, maybe a quick answer. So yes, definitely, I have felt frustrated at times. These are big societal processes. And perhaps in my younger years, I really thought, you know, you get the evidence and then you give the evidence and then people will act. And then you realize, no, there's so many different interests that it's very hard to react immediately from a political standpoint. So what I would say is, I don't know if it was Tim who said, who got into environmental law at some point. I very much agree that that is something that really changes and which is undervalued. That laws really set the rules of what is going on, what you can and what you cannot do. So if you wanted to go from environmental policy towards environmental law, that would certainly be an avenue. And of course, other places to change things is vote for the people that you think do what you think should be done on the environmental policy side. And you can also, I don't know where your work would take you. Obviously, there are organizations or government or local institutions, research institutes where you could go. But there's also a lot of really great NGOs nowadays who really move the needle. And where it is worth going, it's not some simple volunteer work where you don't change anything. So I think nowadays there's a lot of opportunities, and the more people want to change something, the more one can get there. Thanks.
Thank you. We're at the end of the panel, so I just want to say thank you for all of your time and your answers to these questions. If anybody else has anything that you would like to ask our panelists, please email TGR or connect and reach out to us. Thank you again for all of your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invite. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It was good to meet you all. Thank you for inviting. It was a great learning event as well for me.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.